Okay, I think it's close enough to get started. Thank you everyone for being here. And before we get started today, I wanted to just begin by recognizing that the city has lowered our flags in front of City Hall in recognition of the passing of our longtime community member and former city manager, Jim Sawyer. Jim was the city manager in 1967 for the city of Alberni when the two cities amalgamated, and shortly became, or when the two cities amalgamated, became the deputy city manager and then quickly moved into the city manager for the city of Port Alberni. He was a longtime local government contributor, a people person. I've never met anybody who knew Jim that didn't consider him a friend, and that Jim didn't consider a friend in return. Whenever I saw Jim and his wife Erica in public, he was always quick to offer support, congratulate us, and tell us to just keep up the good work. I don't know if he actually liked what we were doing in the time or not, but he certainly was always positive and supportive, no matter the situation. He was a wonderful member of our community, and he is the only city employee to ever have been given the title of Freeman of the City. So I think it really speaks to just how positive of an influence Jim had and has left on the city of Port Alberni. So I'd like to offer condolences to Jim's wife, Erica, as well as his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And if everyone would just join me in a quick moment of silence to think about Jim and all that he contributed to our community. Thank you. We will now call to order our regular meeting of council and start by recognizing that we are holding our meeting on the unceded territories of the Sept and Huipetchesset First Nations. We do have an agenda in front of us. Are there any late items to add from councillors? Okay, seeing none, any late items from staff?
No, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Would somebody like to move approval of our agenda? Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried, thank you. And we have minutes from the special meeting held at 9 a.m. and the regular meeting of council held at 2 p.m. on August 8th, 2022. Would somebody like to move adoption? Moved by Councillor Poon, seconded by Councillor Solda. Any comments on the motion? Minutes. Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you. And we will move on to public input period, which is an opportunity for members of the public to address council on topics of relevance to City Council. A maximum of 4 speakers for no more than 3 minutes each will be accommodated. Would anybody like to come forward and speak today? Okay, thank you. Then on to delegations, and we have one delegation today, and that is Molly Hudson and Colin from Mosaic Forest Corporation. Come on forward.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here in front of you today. My name is Molly Hudson. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Mosaic, and we're just going to take this opportunity to provide you an update on our business, some local things of interest, and hopefully provide the opportunity for questions as well. I'm going to start us off. David Bolesny couldn't be with us and sends his regrets today, and then Colin Cosman, my colleague, land use forester, will take us home. All right, and I've gone too far already. Here we go. So as a reminder, who is Mosaic? So we are Canada's largest private timberland producer. We also operate on a number of Crown licenses, but in this region, we are almost entirely a private timberlands operator. We have a large number of folks employed in our operations. Over half of our production comes from a unionized workforce, so over 2,000 people employed through contracts in our business. We serve over 50 local mills and also export markets, so both local BC and international markets served by our fiber. In this region, our business, our company is contributing about $31 million a year into the local economy through the supply chain. And the forest sector as a whole in this region is more in the neighborhood of $60 million a year to this local economy. So a big contributor to this region, as you all know. We're really excited about our work now in innovation for safety and technology. So just in case you weren't aware, we're a member of BC's Digital Supercluster, which is working to improve safety and efficiency in the woods through technological advances like satellite links and production tracking. A couple of our certifications on the right, certifications are an important part of our business. They provide those third-party assurances to our partners and our customers that we are doing what we say we're going to do. And so first, the Progressive Aboriginal Relations certification is granted by the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business and crystallizes and solidifies our commitment to reconciliation, our commitment to long-lasting, durable relationships with Indigenous peoples and our First Nations communities that we work within. SFI is our forest management standard on the bottom there. This is the standard that really drives our forest practices and policies on a day-to-day basis. And it also provides consumers at the end of the supply chain, when you go to your local store to buy a forest product, that the fiber for that product was sourced from a sustainably managed timberlands. A couple of other highlights. We've been operating for over 100 years on the BC coast with our predecessors. We are owned by 2 public sector pension funds, privately owned. We are well aligned with those pension funds in our values and our commitment to long-term returns, sustainable forest management for the next 100 years. And as I mentioned, our timber is offered to local mills first through the surplus test before we can send any of our products overseas. A couple of our key achievements from the last year, we were recognized really recently actually as one of BC's top employers, so something we're really proud of. That's all of the work that we do in communities, all of the work we do for our own people. One of the things that we've recently embedded within our own strategies is a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So really bringing the forest, broadening the forest sector's demographics, making sure that Mosaic is a welcoming place for all folks to work. On the community front, we donated over $500,000 last year to community organizations across the province, including a couple of our big long-term partners, the Pacific Salmon Foundation and the Marmot Recovery Foundation, all the way down to small local events, like the Chamber of Commerce events recently, and Colin will highlight some other local partners for us later. We're also heavily invested in First Nations scholarships and training programs, trying to provide more pathways for folks from our First Nations communities to join the forest sector and contribute and broaden the way that we approach forest management in BC. A project I'd like to highlight today that's new and exciting is called the Big Coast Forest Climate Initiative. This is a carbon crediting initiative. I put the website on the bottom there. I encourage you to have a look if you haven't already. We think that this is a really great solution for all of the values that folks on coastal BC hold. And so what this project is a 25-year commitment to not harvest 40,000 hectares of forest on our private timberlands. So these are areas that could have been harvested, would have been harvested, and we've removed from that harvest queue to protect for carbon credits. Most of these 40,000 hectares are mature and old forest. And what we're doing is we're offering these credits. The credit generated by not harvesting these forests goes onto the voluntary carbon market. So this is when another organization has a commitment to net zero and is charting a path to net zero for their own organization, they are looking to buy carbon credits to support that path to net zero. So this is a very appealing project to folks who are looking for those kinds of credits. It's nature-based. It's a commitment to retaining old forests. There are a lot of co-benefits, so wildlife habitat is protected. We've put a number of these hectares in the city of Port Alberni's drinking watershed to address the drinking watershed values. There are socially sensitive harvest areas that have been put into this project. So really a win for communities, a win for the company. It's a financially viable project, contributing broadly to climate solutions. It covers a number of UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we have 2 project extension agreements with the Pacific Salmon Foundation to do marine and freshwater climate research, and the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas Group, who will use the funding generated from this project to work with nations to chart a path for what happens to these areas beyond that 25-year project timeline. So something really excited about, always happy to talk about it more, but I think a win for both our organization and the communities that we work in. And I'm going to pass it on to Colin here.
Great, thanks Molly. Good afternoon, everyone. So just wanted to take a minute and talk about watersheds and protecting water quality. So the photo on the screen here is of the Bainbridge area. We do a lot of work through the year with water purveyors, meeting with the purveyors, doing field reviews, which we have done in this area, and then lots of communications throughout the year. So really effective opportunities to work together and understand what each organization is doing on the land base. Just wanted to mention professionals and all the prescriptions that are involved with some of the plans for these areas, whether it's road construction, harvesting, wind firming, all those kinds of things. So Mosaic has a lot of forest professionals, engineers, biologists on staff, and consult to a number of consultants that we work with as well. So all our plans are generally produced by professionals, and it helps with the end product. I will say as well, our contract managers, many of them are registered professional foresters, and some of our operators we now view as more professional operators. So they've been working in different areas with different values and really start understanding what plans are communicated and how to practice those on the ground. So when it comes to implementing the plan, it's a really valuable, effective team. On top of that, and Bainbridge is a good example, where we had an environmental monitor involved with the area just to make sure that everything does get managed in terms of activities and on-the-ground operations. And I'll just mention here, we do make a lot of extra efforts around community watersheds. The photo on the lower right is of a portable toilet that we bring into the watershed during any active operations. So just wanted to talk about community access for a minute or two. So we've been making a lot of efforts to open up public opportunities for access on our private managed forest lands. First one I wanted to talk about is the ash pilot. So that's been happening for a few years now. It's really to open up the ash main line basically 24/7 so that the public can access the Scout and Lowry areas. So that's been working with the ACRD, Rec Sites and Trails BC, Ministry of Forests, and other groups. So really successful there in opening up those lands for public use. Just a few more examples. The Sprout Lake Water Sports Association, they have an access agreement with Mosaic for a number of years now, and that's a great facility that brings people to the Alberni Valley and allows people to use the lake and camp at that site, so really valuable in that respect. We've been working with the Alberni Motocross Association, so just renewed their agreement. So that's another opportunity where people use our private managed forest lands and events happen on that land. I joined Mosaic roughly 2 years ago, and when I started, Molly asked me to design and oversee the new campground at the Port Alberni Hump. Through that process, we've worked with the Hupicheseth First Nation. So the main photo there is just an aerial shot of the new campground and a photo of me standing with Ron Hamilton, who's an elder at the Hupicheseth Nation, and just really valuable to work with them. They named the site, and the day that photo was taken was a ceremony for cleansing and blessing the site. So that's been a really successful opportunity, and just another area and supporting families and camping on our land base. So with that, just want to thank you for your time. I know we do have a field tour coming up on September 19th. So I look forward to that with everyone, and maybe I can turn the floor to open up if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from council? Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you. I've got a few. So you talk about the Ash Main Line being a pilot. It's been 2 years. What happens next?
Yeah, so last year it didn't really open as a pilot. This year was really the first year. There's still final details being worked out around the access with the Ministry of Forests and the agreement. They still have to finalize that agreement around liabilities, and there's multiple owners at the start of the Ash Main. But really it's a pilot to see if industrial traffic and public access can happen together safely and without any issues. So we really want to learn how that works, how it looks, and one of the parts of the process was installing a new kiosk at the start of the main line to communicate to people that they need to yield for industrial traffic. On Mosaic's side, we've had lots of conversations with our contractors just to make sure that people are aware that it is going to be opened up for the public, but it's really learning from this initial pilot so that we can explore other opportunities. There are other areas that we're considering, but we want to learn from this initial pilot and then figure out where the next areas might be best.
Yeah, ultimately my question would have been when's Cameron Valley and Mount Arrowsmith going to be open up to the public?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the Ash Main, we've invested a fair bit of money brushing with signage. The Cameron Main, we're still considering what that looks like, and the new campground complements, I think, that approach and direction. But the road system and the terrain and just the history there with how that road is designed and the access there, I think we still need to, again, figure out what worked really well with the Ash pilot and then grow from there.
Okay, another question, the 40,000 hectares that's going to be removed from the allowable cut and that on top of land that's sold,
Sure.
How does that affect your AAC, your sustainable long-term cut?
Great question. So in order for this carbon project to be verified, we go through an extensive auditing process. And one of the things that the auditors look for is that we have reduced our cut in a commensurate way with the reduction of that area from the land base. So our annual harvest levels are set and audited externally. And so we have reduced those harvest levels. That's now incorporated into our 2023 planning and verified by the auditors. So we don't have, you're probably familiar with kind of the Crown Oversight AAC model that is run out of district offices and ultimately by the Chief Forester of the province. Our annual harvest levels are set independently and verified through a number of firms, external auditing firms, to report into our ownership group. So that 40,000 hectares, yes, is removed from our harvesting for the next 25 years, and the cut levels have been reduced to reflect that.
Okay, lastly, you mentioned your wood goes to 50 local mills, I believe, and export as well. Do you know the breakdown of export versus domestic?
It certainly, it varies by market conditions. So in the last year or two, when the domestic market has been very hot, proportions locally have been higher. So, 60%-ish. But yeah, I would say roughly over the last 5 years, a reasonable estimate of the, plus minus would be 50-50.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other questions from Councillor Haggard?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We never hear from Mosaic, so I'm really happy that you came to visit us today.
We're happy to do this, but thank you for that comment. We'll make sure we come more regularly.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. It's nice for us to hear what's happening
Great.
with our local forestry industry.
Great.
And I hope moving forward that the city and Mosaic can have a good working relationship together, because they certainly want to ensure the long-term viability and sustainability of our forestry industry.
Right.
It's not an easy industry to be in right now. So
You're right.
thank you for all that you do. And
Thank
Great.
you. I appreciate those comments very much.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Okay, I just want to comment on the good work that Mosaic has been doing over the last few years. I think the Big Coast Forest Initiative, working with the regional district and the city on public access, the campsites are fantastic improvements, as well as the investments at Shoemaker Bay that we really work directly with you on in order to get more logs in the water at that facility and fewer trucks through our community.
Yeah.
I was just talking with someone who has a business uptown recently who really commented on the change in the number of trucks going through the uptown of our community. So those are really appreciated initiatives that Mosaic has taken on. And on the other side of that, not to be too critical, but we do know that there's still logging going on in quite a few really key areas of our watershed. So I totally recognize that Mosaic is making their best effort and always improving how you're logging in the watershed, what type of monitoring is going on, and practices that are there. But I think in the long term, and the city has been clear that we would love to own some more key pieces of our watershed, the pieces that are really critical, the pieces that are going to have, the biggest impact on whether or not we have to put in, a brand new water treatment facility or not. So these are really expensive potential consequences to our community if the users in our area don't if standards aren't met as they need to be. So really appreciate the work that Mosaic is doing, and just kind of putting that out there again, that the city would like to, continue conversations about owning some really critical pieces of the watershed long term. And I think we're seeing that kind of messaging from the province as well, that there'll be support there to support the conversations when we get to that point with the creation of the new ministry that our MLA happens to be the minister of. So I know that there's good work happening, and I want you to know that we see that, and we appreciate the steps that have been taken. But the logging that does go on at places like Bainbridge and other really critical pieces of our watershed remain a concern for us, for sure.
Yep, noted, absolutely. And I hope we'll be able to have more of this conversation when we go to the watershed and stand there and talk about these things in person. But Mosaic is always willing to enter into discussions on the sale of lands at fair market value. So, if we want to embark on those discussions again, we will be at that table.
We'll leave the rest of that conversation for another day, for
Absolutely.
sure. But thank you. Any other comments here? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Molly.
Thank you
and
for your
Colin.
time.
Appreciate you
Appreciate
coming today. Okay, no unfinished business today. We'll move on to staff reports. Item number 1 is accounts. Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the certification of the Director of Finance dated September 6, 2022 be received and checks numbering 151027 to 151285 inclusive, and payments of accounts totaling $2,921,782.36 be approved.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Paulson. No comments. All in favor? Carried. And on to item number 2 from the development planner. We have development application for 3747 10th Avenue.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Oh, I think we're on. Okay. So this development application is for 3747 10th Avenue. And this is an application for both a development permit 2113 and development variance permit 107. The applicant is Raymond DeBeeld on behalf of his architecture company. The intent of the application is to renovate a large commercial unit at a commercial plaza, and it has an existing building, which is the plaza itself, and an existing parking lot. And they're doing development on this property, but the amount of parking that exists in the plaza does not meet the current zoning bylaw requirements. This recalculation of the parking is triggered upon new development on a property, and so a development variance permit would be required for the development to proceed as it's being proposed. So the core detail of this variance request is to reduce the required amount of on-site parking. And here's the property you'll be familiar with at the corner of 10th and Redford. I believe it's called the Alberni Mall or Port Alberni Plaza Mall. It's a fairly historic property. The lot itself was created in the 1950s and then was redeveloped in the 1970s. And they're proposing to redevelop the unit sort of in the center of the mall, right beside Shoppers Drug Mart. I believe it was formerly a Fairway Market. And you can see some parking stalls highlighted in red. That's also a small portion of the parking lot they'll redevelop as well. Here's a conceptual image of how the development would look when completed. You can see a new facade as well as some landscaping improvements to the parking lot. And same concept from another angle. And the variance itself, the existing parking on site, I mean, there's 209 parking stalls. When we recalculate the parking on new development, our zoning bylaw indicates that they would have to provide 274 parking stalls. They're proposing 215 parking stalls. This development would create 6 new parking stalls beyond what's already there right now. But the way we calculate it with the zoning bylaw, there's a shortfall of about 59 parking spaces. And this is entirely due to having an old site developed before the city had a zoning bylaw. And now we're applying the city's current bylaw requirements to that same property. We calculate parking as a factor of floor space. So if they build a certain amount of floor space, you need a certain amount of parking spaces for that floor. They're not creating any additional floor space with this development. They're renovating that unit. So in granting this variance, should council choose to, staff don't see any negative impacts on the neighborhood from this request. And once that request, if that request is granted, then the property will be in compliance with the zoning bylaw. And the development itself does meet the development permit area guidelines of the official community plan. So staff's recommendation is that council authorize the issuance of development variance permit 107, and which would reduce the required amount of parking from 274 spaces to 215 spaces, and that council authorize the issuance of development permit 2113 once the city receives the required landscape security. And I'll be happy to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Are there questions from council? Councillor Washington.
No, not so much a question, Madam Mayor, but I'm just thrilled to see something going in there. I know in the past we had an apartment building that was going to go in there, and that's where Councillor Paulson was going to retire, and then they kiboshed that. So I'm just hoping there's something there interesting for is there any hints of what's going in there?
In their application, the applicants did let us know and let the Planning Commission know that it would be a Dollarama, as well as 2 more smaller commercial units that are in the same commercial building.
Councillor Solda.
Yeah, well, I'm just glad something's going in that space. It'll hopefully help the merchants that are around it. And in its heyday, I've never seen it filled, the parking spaces where you couldn't park in there. So I totally agree with the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to be less positive. I am glad also to see something potentially going in there. However, I don't think we should just accept something. I am disappointed to see just a couple improved, still large commercial storefronts. I think that we have seen, several businesses in that mall fail. We've seen, some come in. There's some great long-term businesses there. However, that space has been for lease for years, and I think it's for lease because the world has changed, and I don't think putting in one more big commercial operation is really the best use of that space. I'm very disappointed to see that there's not any residential built into this application. I think that this is a stopgap in order to, put something in now that will have a bit of success now, but in the long run, it will probably fail because businesses like this and really large businesses fail without residential built around them. I would really like to see back to closer to what the last application was that didn't move forward for this, where there was residential above with commercial below, and that residential above will support it, will support the commercial below. So I don't really like this application just generally. I think it's kind of just a poor use of the space, and I think if we're not pushing our most our most centralized commercial buildings, when they are redeveloped, to be redeveloped with residential above and that added density above, then we're not really building long-term successful applications. I think that, you know, this is one of the probably the best spaces in our community for higher density residential to go in. And if this improvement comes in now, I think it's a short-term, you know, somewhat win and long-term loss that we've lost that space for potential higher density units. So I don't support this as it is. I'm disappointed that the application that we approved a few years ago is not moving forward, but I think that there is no better spot in the community for higher density residential, and I think we should not approve this so that we can hold out for something better and push the developer to come back and find something better, because I just don't think that this makes a lot of sense as it is, in my opinion. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, the developer's not in the audience. Is that developer here? Too bad. I would agree with the residential part. That was a big loss for the community at the time, and it was disappointing that they didn't move forward, because there was a lot of people who were waiting, especially a lot of seniors that really wanted something close to everything, and everything was there. But then I look at it, is it going to stay empty for many, many years? And behind it right now, we have homeless people behind, and we hear, well, I hear from the merchants that people are doing things behind the building, so something has to happen. It is a dollar store. It now makes 4 in our community, but something has to happen. So residential still would have worked there, and I think it would have been an amazing thing at that point in time. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Poon, and then Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you. I would agree. It's a very poor use of the land. I would love to see higher density in this spot, and you know, it's an easy, flat spot to build on. There's no reason for anyone to waste it using, you know, a single-story building.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
Just so I'm clear, the idea is to have 3 different storefronts here, right? A Dollarama and 2 other things, is that correct?
That's correct.
So just to remind my colleagues, you know, 2 blocks away is the old high school lands where there's all kinds of new apartments and duplexes and homes. And this area is really, I think, very well suited for those people to be able to walk to pick up whatever you pick up at a Dollarama, and hopefully the other 2 stores that go in there provide something that people need. So I think it's a great opportunity for finally doing something with that empty space, because you can't wait forever for something to go in there. Thank you.
Marianne.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just thought maybe it might be helpful if I just did a point of clarification. So understanding the need and desire for high density development, that is a zoning requirement, and because these lands are zoned the way they are, the only thing that's required at this point in time is a development permit. And a development permit is for form and character, and then of course there is the development variance permit, which council has the ability to deny if they want to. But I just wanted to clarify that the development permit is part of the development permit area and is consistent with the zoning, and certainly understand the desire of how we look at this, and perhaps it's something we look at in our OCP update, and how we look at this corridor, and again, addressing the residential component. So I just hope that's helpful.
It clarifies. We're talking about the parking spaces. Other comments from council? Okay. I mean, personally, I just want to reiterate that I don't think that this is the best use of the parking variance. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to continue to see empty storefronts. We have a lot of empty commercial in this area, or in our community, and in this area as well. And I think that that's not going to change in the long run unless we start seeing higher density. And certainly the old high school site is not too far off, but there's a lot of empty commercial storefronts in this community. So for me personally, I don't support this variance to facilitate the development. Would somebody like to read the motion? Councillor Solda?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I move that the council authorize the issuance of the development variance permit number 107, and that the Director of Corporate Services be authorized to sign and permit granting the following variance to the zoning bylaw at 3747 10th Avenue. 1, vary section 7.9 requirement amount of parking to permit a reduction of the required on-site parking from 274 spaces to 215 spaces for a variance of 59 spaces. Do you want it one at a time?
Nope, that's good. Thank you. And is there a seconder?
Second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Washington. Any additional comments? Okay, seeing none on the motion, all in favor? And opposed? Carried. Councillor Solda.
And B, that council authorize the issuance of development permit number 21-13, and that the Director of Corporate Services be authorized to sign the permit, including the development plans as shown on Schedule B, prepared by Raymond DeBild Architect Inc., and dated July 25th, 2022, subject to the City of Port Alberni receiving the required landscaping security in the amount of $9,414.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Corbeil. Any additional comments?
I do have one.
Councillor Washington and then Councillor Solda.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. Just one question. When we send out a development application, we always send out the correspondence to, I believe, a 75-meter area. To our corporate officer, is there any idea how many letters you sent out for this application?
So notification in this case was 302.
Okay, thank you. And we got 2 responses.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Solda.
So, Madam Mayor, my question is the $9,414. As we know, prices keep rising and costs keep escalating. So is that going to be enough by the time they get this all in order and the ducks in order? Is this going to be enough for down the road?
Marianne.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, so what happens when we get a cost estimate is that it's provided by a landscape architect. That cost estimate is then used at this point in time, and it goes with the development permit. So when they actually come with the building permit, that security is held so that we ensure that the landscaping's through. We have to do it in today's dollars with the security based on the estimate of today.
So, Madam Mayor, if I may, so if like 6 months down the road, they go, oops, it's going to cost a lot more. I mean, we'll have to, and they don't do the landscaping. I'm just hypothetically throwing that out there. Who pays?
Yep. Yes, to answer the question, yes, if they defaulted, we would only have the money in today's dollars. We wouldn't have the money in 6 months from now, dollars, if there was a difference.
So we have to have what is happening today, not
Correct.
too bad. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this piece of the motion? Okay, seeing none on the motion, all in favor? And opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, and on to item number 3 from our development planner. We have development application 5019 Montrose Street.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So this application is at 5019 Montrose Street, is for a development permit 2115 and development variance permit 112. And the applicant is Andrew Nordman, doing business as Jam Jar Properties Incorporated. The intent of this application is to rebuild 3 townhouse units at 5019 Montrose Street. The property is currently zoned RM2, medium density multifamily residential, and there's an existing building on the property with 5 units already. The dimensions of this lot don't actually meet the zone that it's currently designated as, and the applicant there, and this requires a development variance permit. To get into the details of the variance, the applicants are looking to also reduce the parking requirement on site, and then to bring that existing older property into compliance with the zoning bylaw regulations, and the property already has the RM2 zone. Here is a map of the property at the corner of 2nd Avenue and Montrose. Here is a clip from the city's zoning bylaw. You can see it's zoned RM2, and around it are a number of properties zoned R2, 1 and 2 family residential, and there's some more multifamily, also zoned RM2 across the street. And this is an air photo of the site circa 2015 or 2016. You can see the existing building still on the lot. There's 5 residential units in there, and you can see the rest of the property is more or less a patch of dirt at the time the photo was taken, because there was a larger multifamily building on the property, and a large portion of it burnt down due to a fire around 2015. And so this is where the applicants now are looking to rebuild on that portion of the lot under the current RM2 zoning. And here's a picture of their concept. It would be 3 townhouse units with garages underneath them, and they would also be improving that existing building that is still on the corner of 2nd and Montrose. And the variances actually has two parts to it, as I explained on my first slides. The first is the parking, which they requested as part of their design, where the zoning bylaw says they need to provide 10 parking spaces on site and provide it at a rate of 1.2 spaces per dwelling unit. And they're proposing 8 parking spaces, which is 1 per unit. And the parking would be provided on site off of the laneway and through the vehicle garages. And there would also be street parking and driveway parking available for visitors. And it's worth noting that this site is also within walking distance of 3rd Avenue and the Uptown shopping area. There's a picture of that concept. Again, you can see the parking garages underneath, but I'm also going to show you the rest of the parking on site. In the gray box, that's the existing building. This is a landscape plan. It's a little busy, but the gray box is the existing building. The yellow box shows the new 3 units, and then in the red circle, you can see where the parking would be off the laneway. And they're also creating a bunch of green space towards the rear of the property. There's some space for the existing tenants and some little patios for the new residents. And here's a picture of their concept from the laneway, where there would be 5 parking stalls beside the building. And so the other part of this variance request is that the existing property dimensions are not quite large enough for the zone that it already has. And the existing building encroaches into what would normally be the setback area. So these variances upon redevelopment are required by our zoning bylaw, or required for council to consider them rather. So the other half of the request is to reduce the minimum frontage from 25 meters to just over 20 meters, to reduce the required minimum lot area from 840 meters squared to 760 meters squared, to reduce the minimum setback in the side yard from 5 meters to just under half a meter, and to reduce the minimum setback in the front yard from 6 meters to just over a half meter. And these half meter setbacks are for that existing building, which is almost at the back of the sidewalk at the corner of 2nd and Montrose. To summarize, the application does meet the multifamily residential development permit area guidelines in the OCP, and this sort of infill development does align with council's policy 5.1.2 regarding the infill of those vacant lots to contribute to vibrancy. And these variances aren't anticipated by staff to have any negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood. So staff's recommendation is that council authorize issuance of development variance permit 112, which would reduce the required amount of on-site parking from a total of 10 spaces to 8 spaces for a variance of 2 spaces, and also vary the minimum side yard setback, the front yard setback, the minimum frontage, and the minimum lot area. And that council authorize the issuance of development permit 2115 once the city receives that landscape security. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from council? Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just pardon me, but for, in my understanding, it's the existing structure that's out of code?
That, Madam Mayor, that's correct.
So everything else would be up to, but it's just that existing one that now they're trying to develop it, it's going, oh, by the way, that's...
Yeah,
okay.
so, yes, Madam Mayor, so redevelopment on the property, even though the lot exists, it has the zoning, there's a building there, we have to relook at all the site development and regulations and how it fits into the current zone. So the lot itself, these different proportions are a bit too small for the current zoning bylaw, and the building is too close to those property lines. So this would all bring it into order and compliance with the zoning bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
There's only one lot there, correct?
Madam Mayor, there were 2 lots actually when they initially applied, but they consolidated into one so they could build over it.
So when you say side, the side step back or whatever the terminology is, It's actually the existing building that they're half a meter away from, correct?
That's correct.
And there's no concern about the neighbor behind? There's no encroachment, or they're not applying to change that at all, are they?
Madam Mayor, that's correct. The rear yard setback is all in compliance with the zoning bylaw. Yep.
So if they would have rebuilt right away, would they have had to have dealt with the new bylaws?
I believe they would have, because we had the same zoning bylaw, I believe, when that structure burnt down. And it's really upon, so there's actually a section in the zoning bylaw that says, like, upon redevelopment, any new construction or new building has to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. And that should be done through the issuing of variances. It gets a little bit complicated when you get into existing non-conforming buildings and fires, and how non-conforming status remains on properties given a certain proportion of the building burning down. But as they've approached this application at this time, we had to look at the entire site and then giving council the option of bringing the whole property into compliance.
And what's the width of the lot from the existing building out to the back alley? How far is that?
So if you look at the back, where the edge of the alley is, I know it's difficult to see on this map, but the edge of the alley to where then there's some parking stalls as you go a little bit west, and then there's the building, it's about 30 feet.
From the edge of the building that's still there towards the alley?
To the edge of their proposed building. So there'd be the existing building and then the 3 townhouses. That stops, then there's about 30 feet to the laneway, and there'll be parking stalls in some of that area.
So more like 100 feet from the edge of that building to the back alley, the edge of the existing building to the back alley. That's what I'm trying to make clear.
Potentially. Unfortunately, I'd have to check the plans again to get that specific number. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
So, I know this is a weird question, but wouldn't the existing building be grandfathered in? Because when it was built, there was no probably setbacks or anything like that, nothing like that.
Madam Mayor, I think depending on how much of the structure burnt down and the non-conforming status, they may actually have some sort of legal or non-legal non-conforming status. We didn't even venture into that conversation because we do have a section in our zoning bylaw that just says, if this is being redeveloped, then it should be brought into compliance with the variances. And so we're just following that section under the administration portion of our zoning bylaw. And I do understand it is very administrative.
Which is a good thing. Thank you.
Councillor Paulson.
I remember when this fire happened, and I'm surprised that it's taken this long for redevelopment. It's a revenue property, and I'm surprised that the property owner didn't want to optimize property. And Madam Mayor, this meets some of your density thoughts in the neighborhood. So I'm just really happy to see something going on, and I hope the owner of the property, I wish them all the success moving forward.
Thank you. My only question is around the parking variance. What would it, I know in our community, so it's 1.25 spaces per unit. What is normal in other communities? Is there, I mean, I'm sure there's a range, but that's something that we're asked to vary a lot for. I think I remember on the Athol apartments, we varied it. On most developments that we have come forward, we're varying it. Yep. So I'm just wondering if 1 per unit is more standard, and that's kind of what we're typically varying to.
I think what you see and what the city should set their parking requirements towards, Madam Mayor, is has to do with a lot of the development community and the requests that you get. And there's a broad range of parking requirements in all communities. Sometimes it's 1.5 per dwelling unit, or even 2 sometimes, which I would consider to be quite high. But it really depends on the community and their expectations of parking. And then where in your community as well. I mean, near a downtown core, Port Alberni requires half a parking stall for multifamily. But say a little further out in the suburbs, 1.25. But as you start to get a lot of development requests from the community, it's a good idea to take a closer look at what developers need to actually build upon their property to get the multifamily development your community might require in their housing needs assessment. So In this case, where we get a lot of variances, often it's because developers are trying to build multifamily units on properties that are existing in our community to do this infill development. And the biggest barrier they run into is that the parking takes up a lot of space on their property, and they want to develop on that with a building and housing. So there's no easy answer, unfortunately, but it's definitely up to each community to decide, and to decide what parking regulations apply in different parts of their community according to that neighborhood's need.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Any other questions? Okay, Councillor Paulson, would you like to read the motions?
I'd like to move that council authorize the issuance of development variance permit number 112, and that the Director of Corporate Services be authorized to sign the permit granting the following variances to the zoning bylaw of 5019 Montrose Street. 1, vary section 7.9, required amount of parking to reduce the required parking from a total of 10 spaces to 8 spaces for a variance of 2 spaces. A reduction from 1.25 spaces per dwelling unit to 1 space. 2, vary section 5.15.2 RM2 site development regulations. 2, 1, reduce the minimum side yard setback from 5 meters to 0.48 meters for a variance of 4.52 meters at the south property line. Reduce the minimum front yard setback from 6 meters to 0.48 meters for a variance of 5.52 meters at the west property line. 3, reduce the minimum frontage from 25 meters to 20.11 meters for a variance of 4.89 meters at the west property line. And 4, reduce the minimum lot area from 840 square meters to 766 square meters for a variance of 74 square meters at the west property line.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Corbeil. Any more questions or comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? None opposed? Carried.
Want me to go?
Keep going.
And B, that council authorize the issuance of development permit number 21-15, and that the Director of Corporate Services be authorized to sign the permit building, including development plans as shown on Schedule B, prepared by Azran Architecture Incorporated, subject to the City of Port Alberni receiving the required landscaping security in the amount of $52,586.69.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Solda. Any final comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, and moving on to item number 4 from the Manager of Planning, we have temporary use permit for 3665, 3675, 3689 4th Avenue.
Good afternoon. So the purpose of today's application is for a temporary use permit for a low barrier shelter to permit up to 30 units of temporary transitional housing called tiny shelters, with 2 sanitary stations, an office, bicycle parking, 2 outdoor gathering areas with a cover and furnishings, garbage area and soft landscaping, to be located on city lands at 3665, 3675, and 3689 4th Avenue. The Port Alberni Friendship Centre has received funding from BC Housing to operate a temporary low barrier shelter, which will be reviewed on an annual basis. The purpose of today is to provide a discussion with council on the temporary use permit and the details surrounding it and the various requirements that are attached to your report. We're asking for council to consider proposed resolutions. 1, to direct staff to give notice as per the Local Government Act and the Community Charter for a temporary use permit for a 2-year period, and also for disposition of city lands for a 2-year lease. Further, we're asking council for consideration for a policy decision to waive the requirement for a development permit for the temporary use permit. So the overview of the project is that back in December of 2021, the city had partnered with the Tushat First Nation, Hupasat First Nation, Nuchagnith Tribal Council, and the Port Alberni Friendship Centre to look for solutions for substandard and unsafe housing, and formed a task force. The work of the task force has resulted in this application before you today. The city has secured lands to make available to a service provider, the service provider being the Port Alberni Friendships Center. BC Housing has provided operating funding for a 2-year period. Staff, the Friendship Society, BC Housing, has been working on a site plan and low barrier transition shelter to accommodate up to 30 beds. And we've undertaken a fair amount of research to understand the requirements for the proposed project and how to address various life safety requirements. So the lands are currently Zone C3, which does not permit this use. It is also in a development permit area, number 2, for commercial. And this is 3 legal lots that is owned by the city. Under our policies in our section of the OCP, under Section C, Plan, Goals, and Land Use Designation, Council has 4 policies to consider in reviewing temporary use permits. So first of all, it must be designated commercial or industrial. This is designated commercial, so it meets that. The second is that it provides it adheres to the legislation under the LGA, which is up to 3 years with an extension of 3 years. With this proposal, we're proposing a 2-year term, October 1st, 2022 to October 1st, 2024. And there can be an application prior to expiry to extend for council's consideration. We also want to ensure that the long-term public policy of the area is not changed. Basically, this meets council's strategic plan. Number 5, fostering a complete community. It focuses on developing and providing safe, clean shelter and services for our most vulnerable citizens in our community. The 4th one is to maintain a reasonable level of compatibility with surrounding development. Currently, the site is surrounded by general commercial, multifamily, some residential, light industrial, so staffing that it is compatible with existing uses. Some of the implications. First of all, the proposed temporary transitional housing is an outcome of the task force to find solutions for to address unsafe and unsuitable housing for our most vulnerable residents. Attached to the report, there is a letter of intent that outlines the financial contributions of each partner in the initiative and is before you for consideration. The partners are the Friendship Center, BC Housing, and the city. And at the August 8th, 2022 regular council meeting, council did pass a resolution to allocate $140,000 towards on-site, off-site utility services, fencing, site prep, and security to support the low barrier shelter. The land for the proposed low barrier shelter is owned by the city and would be leased to the Friendship Center for a 2-year period of time. That lease is also attached to the report before you. As per the local government and community charter, we will need to do the appropriate notice as approved by council for disposition of the lands. That's also attached to your report. Move. Does it want to move forward? There we go. Thank you. As far as communications, referrals have been sent out for comments. And if council wishes to proceed with the proposed temporary use permit, then we would provide notice within 75 meters of the site, 2 advertisements in the local paper. A report would go forward to the APC. Also wanted to let council know that we have been working in cooperation and collaboration with the applicant, the staff, Macola, BC Housing, contractor, co-consultants to address life safety design considerations so that we're addressing the BC Building Code. A draft temporary use permit is also attached to your report, and we're here to answer any of your questions and any feedback that you might have. Twyla, can you? Thank you. And the options available to council. council can direct staff to move forward with the notice for both the TUP as well as the disposition of land. And also, council can exercise under Section 490 of the Local Government Act to make a policy decision to waive the requirement for a development permit for these lands. If council denies the proposed temporary use, then what happens is that council could deny the temporary use permit, and that if that council denies the policy decision to waive the development permit, and that council through resolution can direct staff with amendments to the recommendations. With that, we're just summarizing that this doesn't meet all the OCP Section C plan goals and land use classifications for temporary use permits, and that staff does support proceeding with the proposed temporary use for the low barrier shelter to permit up to 30 beds for temporary transitional shelter, and that we have a staff recommendation, which I won't read out if that's okay by council, but is before you for your consideration. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from council? Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, us as a city, our total investment there is 140,000. And then it also mentions a lease agreement. Is there any money involved in that lease, or that will be one of our world famous $1 leases?
I believe it's a $1 lease. And our total investment is the $140,000, and that includes a number of costs in it, I believe. Tim?
Madam Mayor, council has approved a budget of $140,000 for this project, and if it's going to be more, we'll come back to council.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Paulson.
Just a comment, if I may, and this is a necessary step to move this project forward, and I certainly hope that if we pass this today, that we can move forward in a fairly expedient manner so that we can get ahead of the monsoon season, which it's a La Nina year again. It could be October, but I think this is a great project. It's a project that is so needed in the community right now, and the quicker we can get this project to fruition and cover all the bases, the better it is for the community and for the people, I think, that are living substandard. We know who we're talking about. But thanks for letting me make a comment, editorializing.
Thank you. Councillor Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last week, the Community Action Team put on an event in order to recognize the International Overdose Awareness Day, and they debuted a video that was taken interviewing some of our most vulnerable citizens, and one of the questions was, what do you need to help you right now? And they weren't asking for material things. The two things that they asked for was the ability to have a shower and a safe place to sleep at night. And it brings tears to my eyes that these things we take for granted, that they just hope for and dream about. So I think this will help satisfy some of those most basic needs of some of our citizens in the community, and I'm looking forward to this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, I just can't wait for the changes on 4th Avenue, and that's all I'm going to say. This has been a long time coming, and I'm very, very happy about this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I'll just add, I want to really appreciate all of the work that the Friendship Centre has done on behalf of our task force. At our very first task force meeting that the city put together, we kind of, there was, the 5 of our groups there, and we said, we need someone to lead, and Cindy, I think, put up her hand, and then maybe reluctantly was like, well, I'll take forward. But we were really, really fortunate, Cindy, that you stepped forward to begin the process, and I know you've put in just an incredible amount of work on this project. So really happy to be moving forward on this. I know that it's not a perfect process, but we are working with what we really consider to be an emergency situation. So I appreciate that council and that staff have been willing to move forward in not our normal, cautious and having everything 100% completed in front of us kind of way, but rather moving forward in a more expedited fashion, just based on the situation that we have in front of us that we're trying to address. So thanks to staff and thanks to Cindy at the Friendship Center for all the work you've done.
Oh, good. I'm
Councillor
glad you
Sullivan.
clarified. It was Cindy Stevens, not Cindy, yes.
Yes, sorry, I'm
Thank you.
looking at Cindy
Yeah,
Stevens in front of
Just in
me.
case the audience don't realize it's Cindy Stevens.
Thank you. Okay, Cindy, would you like to read the motions?
With pleasure. Madam Mayor, I move that the council receive this report for a temporary use permit, TUP 22-01 temporary low barrier shelter to permit up to 30 units of temporary transitional housing in the tiny shelters, 2 sanitary stations, 1 office, bicycle parking, 2 outdoor gathering areas with a cover and furnishings, a garbage area, and a soft landscaping, to be located on city lands at 3665, 3675, and 3689 4th Avenue.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Poon. Seeing no additional comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
I'll move that the council direct staff to send notice as per section 494 to 4 of the Local Government Act and send to owners and occupants within 75 meters of the subject property.
Seconded by Councillor Paulson. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
C, I'll move that council direct staff to advertise in the newspaper the disposition of land for a two-year lease as per section 26 and 94 of the Community Charter and section 286 of the Local Government Act to the Port Alberni Friendship Center for temporary low barrier shelter.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Corbeil. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
D, whereas there is an urgent need to secure safe and reasonable temporary shelter for people experiencing housing insecurity, and whereas the city owns the property of 3665, 3675, and 3689 4th Avenue, the lands, which is designated under the official community plan as being in development permit area number 2. And whereas under section 490 of the Local Government Act, Council may exercise its authority in relation to the development permits by resolution. Be it resolved that the council make a policy decision to waive the requirement for a development permit in order to facilitate the installation of a temporary low barrier shelter, which consists of up to 30 units of temporary transitional housing in tiny shelters, 2 sanitation facilities, 1 office, 2 outdoor gathering areas with a covering and furnishings, bicycle parking, garbage area, soft landscaping, and fencing.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Poon. Okay, seeing no more comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. None opposed. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to our next item, item number 5 from the Economic Development Manager, grant funding opportunity.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and councillors. This is the first time that the Federal Natural Infrastructure Fund has become available to small and rural communities. It's designed to encourage natural or hybrid infrastructure approaches to what they're calling community services. And those they've identified as climate change resilience, climate change mitigation, increased access to nature, improved environmental quality, or enhanced biodiversity and habitat. As you will have seen in the report, the planting of trees is an eligible activity and in many respects would be the easiest for us to apply for. But given the examples of projects that the applicant guide cites, we are asking for your approval to pursue a hybrid infrastructure grant for the steep slope above Roger Creek, just to the east of the railway trestle in Roger Creek Park, or just outside of Roger Creek Park. And by hybrid, I mean some concrete lock blocks to shore up the slope, and some trees, shrubs, and plants to hold the dirt in place. That slope is eroding slowly. Some trees have fallen over, and we've got quite a massive log jam just to the south of the creek. If the slope were to, or more trees were to come down, it would damage a fish-bearing stream. It would likely cost a lot of money to repair, and having the slope issues addressed would be another step towards linking the Roger Creek and Scott Kenny trails. The estimated cost of doing that in early 2021 was $150,000, but that's what the fund would call a pure gray infrastructure project, which is not eligible. So we are guessing that increased planting to make it a hybrid project and increased costs since then would bring that project to $200,000, and a municipality our size is required to contribute 20% of the costs, which amounts to $40,000. Today's report to you also recommends that we apply to the BC Active Transportation Grant for the other costs involved in building a multimodal pathway linking those trails, and the costs for that project minus the steep slope mitigation were estimated at $600,000 in early 2021 and would likely now be $625,000. This would be, I think, our fourth kick at the can of getting the trail through since I've been on staff. But we also recognize that these projects are not currently in the budget, and that the updated costs are estimated, and it's conceivable that only one of the two grants might get approved. We don't know. As I mentioned, it's the first time that the Natural Infrastructure Fund has been in front of us. Couple of alternatives for each grant are provided in the report for your consideration. We welcome your suggestions or questions and seek your direction.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
Just a quick question. Are all these projects are they going to cost the taxpayers, or are they going to, indirectly they do because of the grants, or is it all going to be grant funded?
No, there's $290,000 required from city budget.
There is. And I don't know, I still look at our streets and stuff, Madam Mayor, and I wonder, is it better to park this or carry on with our streets to the infrastructure we have on our sidewalks and streets? And I'm just asking that because we are investing in trails right now. So I'm wondering if that should be, I don't know, I'll leave it.
Totally appreciate the option that you present. Like I said at the outset, in many respects, planting of trees would be easiest. The money's in the budget. We've got a game plan. We've been planting trees recently. We've got lots of trees that are reaching the end of their life expectancy. The cherry and plum trees that were planted 35 years ago in honor of the twinning of Abashiri are reaching the end of their natural life expectancy. We see on both commercial thoroughfares and residential streets, it's like a smile with some teeth missing. So really it is your call. Like I said, in many respects, it's easier. I was in Roger Creek this morning, taking some pictures of the area, which I had hoped to get to the Director of Corporate Services to show. It didn't happen. And I have to say, it would be a phenomenal enhancement to our trail system to go that way. So either way, we win. Up to you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Haggard and then Councillor Washington.
First of all, I wanted to just say thank you, Pat, because you're always sourcing out these grant opportunities and you do a great job for us. But I do have a question. Is it possible to put in 2 grant applications, one for the trail and one for the trees, and then see what happens?
So I'd have to look.
Okay.
It does say that you are able to combine applications, but if they're portions of the same project. And I think it would be a stretch for us to say that this slope mitigation and the trees elsewhere in the city are connected.
Councillor Washington and then Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sort of along the lines of Councillor Solda, is there any way we could turn this around to perhaps do some work on our own city parks? That's just a stretch, but I'm just, I drove around on the weekend and sort of looked at a couple of parks, and they could use some loving for sure, but I'd like to see that happen before this happens. I just don't know if it's possible with the grant application. I'm no expert like Mr. Deacon, so just a question.
Pat?
The Natural Infrastructure Fund is really looking for ways to address problems that are in the community. I think to say that our parks need some TLC wouldn't quite cut it, whereas when I've been thinking about the street trees, I've been thinking, well, the argument we make is we need them in place to cool the area, the neighborhood. So it's more than beautification. It's addressing an issue, which is we've got a lot of asphalt and concrete that needs to be cooled. And so that's how we would approach the grant application that way. Parks, I think, would be a bit of a stretch. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I appreciate the comments from Councillor Washington and Councillor Solda, and I agree that there's a lot of other things that should be done. But if I read this right, for $290,000, we would be getting a little over $1 million. Is that correct? If we're successful in both of these grant applications?
That's correct.
And when I look at the resolution before us, it doesn't say if we're successful. If we weren't successful for the grant applications, I wouldn't expect that we would be contributing $290,000. Is that not correct?
If we're not successful, there's no contribution being made by the city.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think in terms of impacts, I think if we went for the Natural Infrastructure Fund for that slope mitigation, we would that would have been our opportunity to secure that funding. And while we won't know the outcome, we do have until October 21st. The active transportation grant just opened today, so we would have until October 21st to think about another approach. But no funds, if neither of the grants are successful, there's no funds.
Thank you. Councillor Haggard.
Just to clarify, Pat, this isn't just for a trail, it's for slope mitigation, which it sounds like it would be very prudent that we were proactive in fixing that. If we waited, it could cause a lot of damage and cost us a lot more money. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct, but the slope is part of extending the trail.
Yeah, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. I hear, I guess, the concerns from council that there are additional priorities to this one. I always try to go back to our strategic plan when looking at, does this make sense for us to move forward with or not? And the Scott Kenny Trail and connecting existing trails that already exist in our community to allow our community to utilize them more effectively is in our strategic plan. I know this is an application that we have made in the past. I believe we made this application last year for around $1 million from the province, and we were not successful with it at the time. However, we were successful with the key-to-key $2.5 million that we received. As we've been going through the conversations around key-to-key multimodal pathways, which parts of the community or of the key-to-key specifically that community members like and don't like, what I've heard really regularly is people use the Scott Kenny Trail and would like to see it completed and would also like to see it tie into the key-to-key work that is being done. Especially as we start to talk about, beginning the construction on the key-to-key path. And this council has talked about beginning with the two loops, one at the Victoria Quay, Roger Creek Trail, Roger Creek Park section, and one at the Somas end, starting with two loops, and then going back to the kind of drawing board, I guess, and reconsidering the connecting piece that we've heard from the community there's not necessarily support for. I think that this work becomes even more important because if we are building that initial loop at Victoria Quay, this will then tie into that, and then the whole Scott Kenny Trail becomes much more usable. The Scott Kenny Trail is a trail that really does connect some really important areas of our community. There's not a lot of walkable paths that don't run along highways in our community to get from Johnston Road down to other areas of the community. We know this is a well-used trail, and I think that this is a really good opportunity to source almost $1 million in grant funds for this. I would always support tree planting as an alternative option. However, because of the good work of this council and again our strategic plan, we have a budget every single year for tree planting. I'm really proud that we have a budget for tree planting. I think it's important that that is just built into our budget every single year. So I think things like street trees on Johnston or other locations, we have the money to replace those trees. It's just about determining what the highest priority is for where to plant new trees. So as a result of all of that, I definitely support submitting this application. I think it's a great project. It's one that the community has asked for, and it's really finishing off very nicely a trail that is already loved in our community and tying it in then again as well to new infrastructure that we're building. And lastly, Councillor Solda mentioned streets and sidewalks, and I think we have to be cautious to try to use the grants that are for something for that thing, and rather than kind of crossing over, we have a grant every single year for infrastructure, the gas tax fund. They just renamed it to something else, but that is an every single year streets kind of grant that exists to us. So we are pursuing that work alongside this, but I think we need to be able to focus on multiple priorities. And I hear from the community on a regular basis that the Scott Kenny Trail is a priority. So I certainly support this application going forward. And Councillor Corbeil, would you like to read the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to move that council authorize staff to amend City of Port Alberni 2022-2026 financial plan bylaw number 5045-2022 by allocating $290,000 towards the Roger Creek Connector Trail project in 2023.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Poon. Any additional comments? Councillor Solda.
So I'm just kind of curious to know what part of the budget this is going to be affect, the 290?
It would likely come back to council for an amendment to our budget. Tim, has there been consideration at this point to where that would be drawn from, if successful?
Madam Mayor, this would be a 2023 allocation, so I'm not sure where the Director of Finance would allocate that from today. It could change before 2023. And I need to tell you that when Mr. Deacon and I were working on this report last week, the Director of Finance was not at work. He was on vacation, so he's likely being surprised by this. So if you call him up to give input, he won't be aware of it. But Madam Mayor, this has been our standard practice to enable a grant by amending a future year budget.
Thank you. Councillor Solda, does that clarify for you, or do you have additional question? Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, is it moved and seconded? Yes, moved and seconded. On the motion, all in favor? Carried. Or sorry, any opposed? Carried.
Further, that council support applications to the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program and the Natural Infrastructure Fund for respective portions of the multimodal Roger Creek Connector Trail project, linking the Roger Creek and Scott Kenny trails.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Corbeil, seconded by Councillor Poon. Any final comments? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. And item number 6, also from the Economic Development Manager, we have generational investment and transformation of Island Coastal Economic Trust.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the Island Coastal Economic Trust, or we all call it by its acronym, ICE-T, is one of 5 regional trusts in BC that exist to support economic development initiatives by communities in their region. Each trust has handled its original investment differently. Our trust initially received $50 million with an additional $10 million in 2018. And they're now asking the provincial government for an endowment of $150 million, primarily based on the arguments that the other trusts have been given a higher per capita amount than what this trust has. The trust has leveraged several times its contributions in projects and is pledging to use $10 million annually in continuing this work. They're asking for a letter of support from council in advance of their submission to the Provincial Treasury Board next week, and they've provided a template that we would modify slightly. ICE-T has approved about $55 million in funding for projects in its area, which serves 35 municipalities or local governments and 48 First Nations, and about 4.6 million of that has been contributed to 15 projects in the Alberni Valley, which is has us punching above our weight on a population basis, because we've got 5% of the trust population, and we've received about 8.5% of their funding. So, we're just asking for council's support for preparing a letter. I have invited the CAO, or the executive director of the trust, to come to the community later in September. He's new to the organization, and although he will have an understanding of the projects that they've financed, he doesn't yet have an understanding of the projects that we're looking for money for. Yeah, true.
Thank you very much, Pat. The iced tea has been a great contributor to our community, and a lot of that is as a result of your excellently written application. So thanks for all your work. And I think this is a great request, and I know something that's been, a historic kind of concern from those of our communities that fall within the iced tea area for a long time, the funding inequity. So I'm certainly happy to move this forward. Councillor Poon, would you like to read the motion?
Yes, I'll move I'll move that council direct staff to prepare a letter affirming support for Island Economic Trust application to the province requesting a generational investment of at least 150 million into iced tea, the sole economic trust serving our region.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Haggard. Any comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Pat. And moving on to bylaws. Item number 1 from our development planner, proposed OCP and zoning bylaw amendment for 4738 Athol Street.
Great, thank you, Madam Mayor. All right, so before council today for consideration are OCP and zoning bylaw amendments for the property at 4738 Athol Street. The applicant is Kim Ray, doing business on behalf of Hookham Holdings Limited. Here's the property, which you're familiar with. It is mid-block between 5th Avenue and 6th Avenue. And here's a concept you're also familiar with of the development on the property. Okay, and the OCP and zoning bylaw amendments, they're requesting changes to the OCP land use and zoning to enable a multifamily infill development at the property. The OCP amendment bylaw would change the residential land use designation to multifamily residential and add the property to multifamily development permit area number 1. The zoning bylaw amendment would add a new comprehensive development zone titled CD2 to the zoning bylaw specifically for the property, and the zoning bylaw, the second zoning bylaw amendment, which is a map amendment, would change the zoning map from R1 to CD2 at the property. On August 8th, there was a public hearing held in council chambers. There were 11 speakers who addressed city council in opposition to the proposal, and the full text of their comments are available in the public hearing minutes. Issues they raised included the density of development, the building height with regards to shadows and potential loss of privacy, increased vehicle traffic, potential changes to the character of the neighborhood. They raised concern regarding the use of comprehensive development zones and council's authority to determine land use, the general location within the community of multifamily housing, as well as rental housing and perceptions of crime. And there was also concern raised about the proposed amendments and the ongoing official community plan review. Staff would just like to issue a few clarifications with regard to some of the comments that were made at the public hearing. A few points in general with regards to City Council's ability to determine land use. And Council has broad authority to determine land use through OCP and zoning bylaws, and this is granted by Part 14 of the BC Local Government Act, and this power has been affirmed by the courts repeatedly when statutory processes have been followed. And with regards to the due process on this application, the city provided all required statutory notices and engagement opportunities for the development application according to the BCLGA, as well as the city's development application notices bylaw. And then the city took additional measures where necessary to ensure that those process requirements were met. With regard to comprehensive development zones and their use, the authority to create a zone, like any zone, to regulate land use is granted by the Local Government Act, and CD zones are typically used to create site-specific land use regulations in cases where other zones are inadequate. And the considerations that go into that depend on the context of the site, the interests of the public, and the interests of the applicant. And City Council has the authority to designate new zones following that statutory public process. With regard to proposed amendments in the ongoing OCP review, Council does have the authority to make amendments to the official community plan while it's under review. And that review that's ongoing right now is expected to continue into 2023. So staff's recommendation is that the OCP amendment bylaw be read for a third time, that the zoning text amendment be read for a third time, and that the zoning map amendment be read for a third time, and that as part of the development process, the applicant be required to complete this following list before council considers final adoption: the design of required off-site works with an estimate, a storm water management plan, geotechnical report, and site grading plan. And I'll be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from council? Councillor Corbeil.
Well, I've got a couple concerns, least of which is it seemed like the timing of the public hearing was it not after we'd already given first and second reading? And once we get to that point, there's no turning back. It's either yay or nay. There's no changes. Pardon? Did we not have the public hearing after the first and second reading this time?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, yes, the public hearing was held after first and second reading was given, as is the standard process. And then we've brought it back now for consideration of third reading by council.
When we discussed this, I think it was Councillor Haggard asked about the potential to do something with the third floor, and the applicant had too much time invested in it and was unable to turn back. Then we hear really well thought of arguments by the people that live in that area. I've been on council close to 4 years now, and this is the first time people have really come out in large numbers with real solid concerns on why they didn't want the zoning. So maybe that's how it works, but I sure would like to have heard them first before we talked about the first and second readings.
Maybe, Marianne, could you just comment on general process?
Sure. I can do it as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In regards to the public hearing, part of the discussion was for council to hear the comments raised, and I believe there was some questions directed at the applicant during that discussion period. And so that's just information for council to consider at today's meeting. So if there's questions about those sorts of issues that have come up, we're happy to answer them, but the purpose of the public hearing was to hear from the public and the applicant and for information for council's consideration moving forward.
And it is normal process for us to have, for this application to go through the planning department, then go to the APC, and then come to council for first and second reading. Then we always at that point have the public hearing, and then it comes back to council for third reading and for final adoption. Okay. Were there additional questions? Councillor Haggard.
Not a question, but just a couple of comments. The public hearing was one of the most lively public hearings I've been honored to attend during the last 4 years, but I really want to thank the people who came out. They were very passionate, and I think it's important that we all come out and care about what's happening in our neighborhoods and our community. But the reality is neighborhoods are growing, they're changing, they're evolving, And we're going to have to accept the fact that our city has a finite amount of land. So multifamily residential developments are going to become more and more common in our single-family dwelling neighborhoods. That's just going to be a fact of life in our future because we're a community that's starting to grow now. I read this morning that there's a slate of candidates running for Vancouver City Council, and one of the things they're supporting is infill development in communities that haven't had it before, such as Shaughnessy. So it's not just happening here, it's happening everywhere. So just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions? Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was reading through the Advisory Planning Commission minutes again, and they spoke about an elevator, which the developer said no, but then they indicated about plans for a wheelchair ramp, and it was noted by the Director of Development Services that the final plans construction would be, they'd look into it. And then the same thing with the fire department commented, and an addition of a fire hydrant would be desirable. So I'm just wondering if these are part of the steps after the third reading that he would have to go through?
Thank you. Brian?
Madam Mayor, that is correct. So if council were to give third reading to this proposal, the next step is to sort out all the servicing and utilities and all that before it comes back for final consideration of final adoption.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Well, I just wanted to comment on one thing for me that, I appreciated that there were several concerns that came forward from residents at the meeting that, we're very much about change in character in the neighborhood. And I think that it's important that residents do come forward and bring those, because we don't necessarily want every neighborhood to change in our community. And in some places it is appropriate. And I think our planning department has done a great job of making sure that it is appropriate in this area. And when I look around at the greater scheme of what is existing in that neighborhood, I see an apartment building almost, adjacent to this property right behind. I see an apartment building a block away, several larger houses with suites, and quite a good mix in this neighborhood. It's a very walkable location, and so I personally feel that it is quite a good fit for this neighborhood. But one thing that I heard at the public hearing that has been bothering me since the public hearing is were several comments about how the zoning is rental only, and how if we allow rentals into our neighborhoods, we will have increased crime. And I just, I know that this is comes from a place of fear, but I just feel like I have to almost state how offensive I find that. And, I would hope that when people come forward to our public hearings, they bring feedback. We don't want anyone to feel discouraged from coming to a public hearing, but to come to a public hearing and state that if you welcome rentals into your area, you're then also welcoming crime into your area, suggests that all people who are not privileged enough to be homeowners are criminals. And I was really, really bothered, and I continue to be bothered by those comments. And it was a couple of people who made those comments. So I found it quite surprising. And I just want to really say that I think that attitude is not representative of our greater community and, the comments that typically come to our public hearings. So I found that really offensive. I was disappointed that it was actually stated in a public meeting. And I just want to say that I think it's excellent that we have rental housing coming to our community. Not everybody is able to be a homeowner. And we know over the last few years, many people who have lived in rentals have had their rental properties sold and have been evicted from their rentals, which has led to massive increases in cost of living in our community as a result of people who have been in long-time rentals for maybe $1,000 a month now having to go and find a different rental unit that might be $2,500 a month. I think it's put a lot of pressure on people who are now living under the poverty line as a result of rentals selling, and the addition of rental-only housing into our community, I think, is critically important. So I'm really happy that this application is coming forward as rental-only. I think we need to see more of that, and I think when people come to our meetings and speak about rentals bringing criminals, we need to publicly state how not acceptable that is. Rental housing is incredibly important in our community. Councillor Poon, would you like to read this motion?
Yes, I'd love to. I'll move that official community plan amendment number 37, 4738 Athol Street, Rye, bylaw number 5046 be read a third time.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Washington. Any final comments? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
I'll move that zoning text amendment number T31, CD2, comprehensive development, multifamily residential infill, 4738 Athol Street, bylaw number 5047 be read a third time.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Washington. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you.
I'll move that zoning map amendment number 48, 4738 Athol Street, Rye, bylaw number 5048 be read a third time.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Washington. Any final comments on this one? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? Any opposed? One opposed. Carried.
I'll move that as part of the development process for 4738 Athol Street, the applicant be required to complete the following before council considers final adoption of bylaw numbers 5046, 5047, and 5048. And 1, design of required off-site works with cost estimate. 2, stormwater management plan. 3, geotechnical report. And 4, site grading plan.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Second, Madam Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Washington. Any final comments? Councillor Corbeil.
My final comment would be there needs to be, in my opinion, and I'm not a planner, but more definition to this comprehensive development zoning. Like, I can appreciate when things get moved a couple meters here and there, but in some cases, it seems almost, why have an official community plan if you can change it so dramatically? So whether or not that makes any sense to the planners, I think that there needs to be some sort of definition to what you can do when it comes to the comprehensive development zoning. Thank you.
I think there is a definition. I mean, I'm sure there is, and maybe Marianne wants to add to this. I think what might be more valuable, because this is something that's newer in our community, would be for council and the public to have more of an opportunity to see examples of where it's been used in the past, just for, you know, our own knowledge and for the community's knowledge as well. And Marianne, feel free to go ahead and add.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, the comprehensive development zone is a tool that has been used to address properties to fit development in an area where the existing zoning may not work or permit it. And what we need to look at moving forward with our OCP and our zoning bylaw is those zones that are not necessarily working to promote certain forms of development, like infill housing. And that's something that we need to have as a discussion as we move forward with our OCP and zoning bylaw. So definitely the planners are aware of some of these issues when it comes to the regulations of zoning and the restrictions, and how do we move forward to address strategic priorities in infill housing.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Councillor Paulson.
Yeah, I would like to concur with Councillor Corbeil. Once again, I read the CD definitions, and it's usually a one-off created to enable development. And it's used when a proposed development can't easily comply with existing zones. For me, it needs some clarification on how it does apply when something doesn't comply with existing zones, and what zones are acceptable to be mitigated or changed. But I found it rather gray. And anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none on the final motion, all in favor? And opposed? One opposed. Carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to correspondence for action. We have one item today, and that is a letter dated August 18th, 2022 from President of the Rotary Club of Port Alberni Arrowsmith, Terry Deacon, requesting council approval to host the 14th annual Hops Festival on Saturday, September 24th, 2022 at Echo. Who would like to move this? Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that council support the Rotary Club of Port Alberni Arrowsmith in hosting the 14th annual Hops Festival on Saturday, September 24, 2022 from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Port Alberni Echo 67 Center, subject to authorized facility rental agreement, provision of standard liability insurance in the amount of $5 million, and receipt of confirmation of the special events permit from the Liquor Board has been issued.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Solda. Seeing no additional comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. And on to proclamations. We have 3 today. Item number 1 is an email dated June 21st, 2022 from the International Wrongful Convictions Committee requesting that Council proclaim October 2nd, 2022 as Wrongful Conviction Day. Would anyone like to move this? Councillor Paulson.
I'm going to move that we don't support this particular one because we have 2 other proclamations that are more locally oriented, Fire Prevention Week and the Association for Community Living, and I really would like to concentrate on those 2 rather than something that's kind of outside our purview.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
just saying.
Absolutely, and we've talked a little bit about focusing more on proclamations that are local so that they can get more attention. So if nobody makes this motion, then it just would not go anywhere. We certainly don't have to defeat it. And if I don't see anyone put their hand up, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, a letter dated August 11th, 2022 from the Fire Chief Prevention Officer requesting Council proclaim October 9th to 15th, 2022 as Fire Prevention Week. Yes, Councillor Haggard.
I don't see anybody from the fire department here today, but I was wondering what kind of activities they have planned for that week, or if they have anything special planned.
Tim?
Council, I don't think anybody here is in a position to respond to that. I'm sorry. But if you watch Fire Department, Port Alberni Fire Department Facebook page, I bet it'll be active there.
And they are typically pretty active in the community. I mean, extra active during that week with events going on. Absolutely. Okay, would somebody like to move the motion? Councillor Haggard.
I'd like to move that Council proclaim October 9th to the 15th, 2022 as Fire Prevention Week in the city of Port Alberni.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Haggard, seconded by Councillor Poon. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. And item number 3, a letter dated August 23rd, 2022 from Craig Summers, Executive Director of Port Alberni Association for Community Living, requesting Council proclaim the month of October as Community Inclusion Month. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, I move that Council proclaim the month of October 2022 as Community Inclusion Month in the city of Port Alberni.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Paulson. Seeing no other comments on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. And moving on to correspondence for information.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So 6 pieces of correspondence in your package, 4 of which are from the same author, Aaron Breivik, and he writes about tiny shelters on 4th Avenue, the SOMAS lands, council meeting live stream, and hoping for an opportunity for live commenting on the part of the public, and business licensing, and in particular costs associated with the charges associated with cannabis retail outlets. We have communication from CMHA regarding their annual Lantern Walk being held on September 9th. That's in respect and honor for the Suicide Prevention Day that's happening on September 10th. We have communications from the property managers of the Harborview Apartments as it relates to the operations of their neighbor, the Bread of Life. We have communication from the Ministry of Forests inviting yourself, Mayor Minions, to serve on the Forestry Workers Support and Community Resilience Council. We have communications from UBCM as it relates to the city being compensated in their grant funding for the Uptown District Revitalization Strategy, and APC minutes of July 28th.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from council? Councillor Haggard.
Do we need a motion, Madam Mayor, to support you being appointed to this advisory council, or do you just accept the invitation?
I would love a motion. So yeah, I was quite surprised to get this letter. There's only, I believe, 2 local government leaders have been chosen across the province. So The full council is being announced in the next week or so. But yeah, really pleased to have the opportunity to sit on this. It's going to be really important work as you know, changes do continue in the forest industry, to have discussion about how our communities can be supported. A lot of it will be talking about transition, and a lot of it will be talking about how to make sure that the industry we do have in our community remains strong, but also operates in a way that, you know, works for us to have industry into the future long term. So happy to accept it, and would love a motion from council to support that.
I will make that motion for you.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Haggard. That's right. I was hoping for one more committee to be on. This is the right one, at least. Thank you. That was moved by Councillor Haggard and seconded by Councillor Paulson. Any comments on that motion? Councillor Corbiel.
Well, if I could, and congratulations, Madam Mayor. I see that in the backgrounder, it looks like there's two focuses. One is on innovation, infrastructure, and economic growth, and the other is on worker training and job development. And I really hope that you can bring to this table a push for innovation, infrastructure, and economic growth. The training, there's some people that, yes, that's the best thing that could ever happen, but for the most part, people that work in the forest industry want to work in the forest industry. So if we have to adapt, if we have to change, I think that's the better vehicle than to just, you know, make work projects and train to be a whatever. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I really agree with you. And I think that's one thing that we've continually heard from members of our community who do work in the forest sector, that they are there because they want to be there, that it's their chosen place to be. And we've heard from a lot of those community members as well that they see the opportunities, you know, for the sector to be strong as we move forward, and for them to be a strong part of that. So I agree. And I will be chatting with you, I'm sure, even when you're off council, about this committee and the work that's going to be going on. Okay, so with that on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Any other items? Councillor Corbiel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could have staff respond to one of Aaron Brevik's questions. It's regarding the sleeping pods. And I know there's a number of people that aren't really sure of what, you know, 100 square feet is kind of the maximum, and why is that? If somebody could answer Aaron's questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Marianne, come on forward if you'd like to.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Yes, in regards to the pods, they're designed with a minimum square footage as one room, and they're roughly 100 square feet. And that's just was the proposed design based on other models that have been used elsewhere in BC. And what we're doing with the proposed, and we're calling them tiny shelters, is that we're working with the architect and the applicant to make sure that they all meet the BC Building Code life safety requirements. And so that'll be brought into it as well. So the size is just more about managing to have a bed, a desk, you know, a window, a door, basic shelter, little less than, say, a single room occupancy that you would see, say, in other areas. But it's a newer form. It's definitely piloting something new, and but that's where it's based on.
Now, I was under the impression that anything over 100 square meters triggered different building codes and things to that effect. If it's under 100, it doesn't. Am I incorrect there?
Under the BC Building Code, yes, there is if a building is of a certain size and is under that square footage, 100 square feet, then basically what happens is that unit doesn't necessarily have to get a building permit, but because this is something that somebody's sleeping in, it falls under a different section of the BC Building Code. For an accessory building like a shed or something where it's not habitable, which is the main trigger, then that's where that would come into effect.
Thank you. Councillor Solda.
Just to piggyback on Ron's question, because it was my question too, but He also asks, but he needs to know the current rezoning text amendments are site-specific to that property, or can anybody just do it? You know, so I already know your answer, but let's just hear the public.
Go ahead and clarify.
Okay, I'll clarify. Yes, it's site-specific, and it's only temporary based on the temporary use permit.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the really critically important thing here is that we are not looking to set this up as, you know, to have this be anyone can just put a pod in their backyard and house people. This is intended to be a temporary stopgap solution to an emergency situation. And really importantly, it is a staffed site. So this is not just somebody, you know, putting pods in their backyard. I think we've seen what happens when, you know, when we don't necessarily that's not the right term, but when a private property owner sets up, you know, the trailers next door, and the people there are not taken care of, where there's not professionals on site, where there's not services being offered, we've seen what happens. And this is exactly to move away from that. So this is not in any way intended to just allow private property owners to add pods to their property. This is a structured site that's going to be monitored by professionals, that has a budget from BC Housing for operating and taking care of the people who live there. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Paulson and then Councillor Washington.
I just want to come back and highlight the Lantern Walk on September the 9th, and it's Canadian Mental Health Association, and really highlighting and bringing out of the closet suicide awareness. And I'm sure that many of us here and in the community have been affected by suicide in the past. And it's time that we bring it out and quit sweeping it under the carpet. And I have attended this event in the past, and I encourage people to at least spend half an hour, 15 minutes, an hour participating in this event. It brings awareness to a problem that we tend to sweep under the carpet. So,
thank you for that, Councillor Paulson. Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Correspondent C, the Harborview Apartments with their block driveway. I noticed leaving our meeting today, our city crews were out painting yellow at the edges and the corners and divots and stuff. Is there any way we could ask them, since they've got the brushes out, that they could paint the driveway in front of Harborview so that at least it's something?
Thanks, that's a great suggestion. Tim?
Madam Mayor, we'll look into it, okay?
Thanks. And while we're looking into it, maybe we could go back to the property owners who wrote this letter and ask them to clean their property up, because it really has, I get that they're complaining about the property next door. However, the standard that this property has been left at recently is significantly lesser than we've seen it in the past, and significantly lesser than it was when we removed our remedial action order. So I think, especially if they're reaching out complaining, I think we should be going back to them and putting more pressure back on to improve the status of that building. Any additional correspondence to comment on? Councillor Solda.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Aaron's other letters, and maybe, I know, Twila, you have mentioned in the past why we do, regarding live streaming and people commenting. Could you maybe tell the public again why we're not doing comments during our live streaming?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair, we continue to, like many other places, have supply issues. So we are continuing to wait on electronic equipment that would facilitate the option that we could accommodate that sort of live feedback and commenting. Having said that, council would then also need to look at their procedure bylaw and make amendments that would allow that sort of participation at a regular meeting. So twofold. We continue to wait for equipment, which I just understood a couple of weeks ago. We've got some pieces of it, but we continue to wait for the full product.
Okay, and one other thing regarding business license, and could we get a clarity how we come up with the formula for our business licenses, and or make a comment back to Aaron? I don't care if it's here or a letter of some sort. Same as the other one regarding, he had one other letter. Well, thank you.
Thank you. And I think specifically on the cannabis portion of the business license that his letter is referencing, that was a very intentional decision to make the cost of that business license higher than the average business license. And that is as a result of the significantly more work that goes into approving those licenses from our staff. So it is not, a tax grab, it's a cost recovery. And I believe it was this council. This council was very intentional in setting the fee at that rate. And I think it makes perfect sense given the circumstance. Okay, thank you. On to report from in camera. Tim.
Madam Mayor. No, and I think I assumed, Madam Mayor, that you would speak to this point.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's right. So council is excited to let the public know. I know we've had a lot of questions lately on the SOMAS lands and what are our next steps on the SOMAS lands. And I always want the public to know that it's challenging to have to be in front of the public saying, we can't tell you what our next steps are yet. But as a result of taking steps on land and legal advice and everything else in public or in private, we have to make sure that we do our diligence before, of course, we release information to the public and make public what we're doing. So the next steps on the process for revitalization of the SOMAS lands, you will see go out in I believe tomorrow, a request for expressions of interest. So this is the next step, and I'll just read a bit of the press release that is going out here. The City of Port Alberni is excited to announce the next step in the journey towards the revitalization of the SOMAS lands with the release of a request for expression of interest from experienced developers, as well as a request for expressions of interest from potential users with an interest or concept for part of the lands. So through the request for expression of interest process, the city seeks to identify parties who have an interest in being involved in the redevelopment of the SOMAS lands, a 43-acre parcel of waterfront land where the SOMAS Division sawmill formerly operated. This could include parties who are interested in purchasing the property or in partnering with the city, as well as operators with interests in forming new businesses on the lands or expanding existing operations. The request for expression of interest is just the beginning of the process. Following that, there will be a request for qualifiers, which will be a more in-depth look at the potential developers of that site. But what we're really excited about is that alongside looking for, a large developer potentially for that site, we are also working to bring an opportunity to smaller users, maybe local community groups or businesses that exist in our community today who have an interest in a portion of the site. Over the last year, I think it's been since we purchased the SOMAS sawmill site, we've had overwhelming interest from both large developers as well as small users. And we wanted to make sure that when we began a public process on the redevelopment of this site, that we didn't overlook the fact that there are several small businesses in our community who we think want to have a part in that redevelopment as well. So this process this is just the beginning of the process, and it will enable us to look for both a larger developer as well as make sure that smaller businesses or local developers have an opportunity to be involved as we move forward. So the formal request for expression of interest will go out, I believe, tomorrow, and there will be a more in-depth press release that will come out that will speak to what that looks like, as well as a frequently asked questions document as well. I'm sure there'll be more questions and there'll be lots of time to answer them, but we wanted to give the public a heads up that those documents are coming out. Any comments that council would like to add? Okay. Tim, anything I've missed? Thank you. Okay, we will move on to council reports. Are there any items from council's reports they would like to highlight? Councillor Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I didn't include this in my report because I typed it up Wednesday morning, and this happened last Wednesday evening. As I mentioned earlier, the Community Action Team sponsored an event in recognition of International Overdose Awareness Day. And as part of the evening, we had many speakers, but the latter part of the evening broke into groups, Royal Cafe style, and talked about recommendations and things that we can do to help tackle this crisis in our community. So we're developing an action plan, and after the action plan is developed, we're going to be presenting to the mayor. And then I've also asked them to come and present to council and see if there's steps that the city can support the community action team in tackling this health crisis in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Haggard, just wanted to thank you as well for all the work that you've done with the community action team. The overdose awareness event was fantastic. I think it was the perfect cross-section of community members. It was a great opportunity for people to hear directly from those who are vulnerable in our community, and I think just a really good opportunity to highlight all of the service providers that exist that are helping in our community. So thank you for your work in arranging that. Any other items from councillors? Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just wanted to congratulate the Carolyn Johnskins and her team from the Tyee Club for another successful Labor Day weekend derby. They put a bit of a mini fest on with the help of the Harbour Quay merchants. So that's very positive that we can maybe forge ahead and get back to normal next year. We've sort of promised the Harbour Quay merchants a meeting in January to go along with our meeting in February. So hopefully there will be bigger things happening next Labor Day weekend, and just want to congratulate 14-year-old Justin McKay. $10,000 richer after the weekend, so good job to him, and again, good job to Carolyn and all her team. She's definitely the queen of the derbies right now, so thank you.
Absolutely, and a big thank you to all the businesses in the community that came forward to put on the fireworks as well. Any of us who have been involved in fireworks know that it is, to put on a show for the community costs a lot of money. So for them to get together and arrange and make that happen with the support of community groups was really fantastic. Okay, on to new business. This is an opportunity for council to raise issues as a result of business of the meeting or to identify new items for subsequent meetings by way of notice of motion. Any items that councillors would like to bring forward? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to question period, and this is an opportunity for the public to ask questions of council. Mr. Anderson, come on forward.
Wasn't sure if I was going to bring this up or whether you were, but it doesn't matter. Again, an attempt to resolve an issue that has been going on for a considerable period of time. I'd like it resolved before the election period comes in. And at the last meeting, I asked questions. Well, actually, in 2020 of February, this very briefly, if you don't mind. Otherwise, there's no sense in me following through with our previous discussion. As I brought up at a meeting with Mr. Ply, CEO, and the mayor about the issues of permits at the Kingsway. I also addressed a couple, about 4 or 5 questions at that time. One of them being, and one which was most important to me, but certainly not the only one, was that who would the general contractor, who was the subcontractors, and did the subcontractors, were they using qualified tradespeople? I pursued that now for over 2.5 years. And at the last meeting, it didn't end too well, but then that's history, I hope. And through the mayor, I asked Mr. Ply if he had any knowledge of who the subcontractors were. Again, how many times I asked that question, I don't even want to count. Mr. Ply said I recently became aware of a contractor, and I tried to get an understanding of what recently was, and that's where I was sort of cut off, but nevertheless. Mr. Ply also said he became aware of one of the contractors from talking to Mr. Smith, And Mr. Smith got that information from Neil Anderson. And so my question that I would have pursued if I was allowed to go to would have been, after more than 2.5 years, why does the staff, building staff, not know the answer to that question? Why do they have to come to me to get the answer? Now, I'm not saying that the contractor that I talked to Mr. Smith about at the meeting we had a few months ago actually was there doing the work. I don't know. That's just what I was told by Councillor Poon, who said she relayed that information to the building department. So I guess but my question was, after 2.5 years, why am I still trying to get answers to these questions? And no one is even talking to me about it. So I guess I'll ask Mayor yourself, is there any update on that concern that I expect a response to sometime sooner? It would be better than later.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So following our last council meeting and then clarification, sitting down with yourself after that meeting, I did ask our staff if we know who the contractors were, and at that time or the plumbing contractor specifically, at that time I was told that we are not aware of who the plumbing contractor for the Kingsway Hotel was, because there was a structural permit taken out, not a plumbing permit specifically. So that is what I am aware of at this point, is that we do not have the plumber's information because there was a structural permit taken out and not specifically a plumbing permit. Staff's going to correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is what I understood following the last meeting and following up after that.
Right. And it's natural that a structural permit be taken out. That's a normal process. Why there was not a permit taken, and I understand from what we talked about earlier this afternoon, that there was no permits taken out. To this date, there's still no permits taken out. Read the sub-trades, let's say plumbing, electrical, whatever.
That's what I'm aware of, because the structural permit that was taken out with an engineer, and so the engineer is listed on that permit, but it does not state sub-trades.
Yes, and just because it's an engineer, and I have faith in McGill that they'll do a good job in the long term, but having the structural permit taken out you still have to take out the permits for the sub-trades. You can't just take a structural permit out and then cover it. And with the permits that come out, the city, whether the city does it or whoever, should be made aware. We should be asking the question, who is doing the work? So we don't even know who did the work. Anyway, I don't want to get into an argument about that. I'm trying to get you to understand why I am so frustrated. Now, the common thing that I've heard, and I'm surprised to hear the fact that there is no plumbing permit out there. Who's doing the plumbing inspections? Is there any inspections taking place? That's a question. I'll limit my questions because I don't want this to go on, right?
Yeah, so I can't speak to staff level operations of whether there needed to be a plumbing permit in place or whether plumbing inspections have been done. I can certainly get that information and have it brought back for you.
Now that should be answered right now, because that is 2.5+ years and we still going back to day one in February 2020, questioning whether a plumbing permit is needed. I'm telling you, without any problems,
and I'm
there
sorry
was
I can't give you that
function
information, Neil, but
needed.
Councillor Poon, are you able to provide that information?
I thought I had provided that information to Mr. Anderson already when I called him in, I think, 2020.
Yes, you did. And I don't intend to put that name out to the public because I'm not sure as to what extent they were involved. And I'm just saying that that's a name I got from you. And Mr. Reply just got that at the last meeting or a short time ago. Why? What has staff done between 2020 of February and today if you don't know who the contractors were that who took out the permits. Now I'm finding out that there's no permits. Now, I'm going to put, there's a lot of other questions that I'm just going to let go because there's so much in this issue that none of you even understand. And I'm just going to put that to a comment that was made by Mr. Ply very early in, or maybe March, April, May, June, of 2020, where he says something to the effect it was, what I can say, there has been a failure in regarding our transparency on this issue, and I couldn't agree more. And that was done a year and a half ago with that comment. If you want me to pull it up in the meetings, I can do that too. So we're back here today, and if I'm hearing that where we are, there's no plumbing permit. Someone here be able to answer that question?
Mr. Anderson, I am going to ask a question once you sit down, but I want to hear all of your questions first.
Well, that's one question I'm just trying to get here.
Yeah, absolutely. So continue.
So my question is, why is there plumbing permits? You've already answered that question. Is there electric permits? Why not? And the other thing is, I've been told consistently over the last 2.5 years that all the permits are taken out. Does every city council member, or were you aware of that? Because I sat at these meetings when we were told permits are all in order. Mr. Polson Polson said at one time, I'm so happy to see that the contractor has acted so fast in pulling the permits. They were already 2 years late to start with. So I know you're all aware that the permits were all in order now. Now I've heard recently, very recently, one day, that it's not the case. Now I'm not going to push this any further. The public have lost all track of what's going on because it all comes in bits and pieces. But I want it to be acknowledged that what I've been trying to get, and sometimes tiring people out with the same questions, has come through. I knew there was something going on. And I don't think there was any contractors. I shouldn't say that. I think it was just whoever, you're going to be the plumber today, you're the electrician. I know that has happened. I just can't get people to come forward. That's all I'm going to say in it, because I'm tired of it. But I'd really appreciate Mayor Minions, because I am sincere in saying I want to put this to rest. I'm not going to get all the answers. I'll put that down to just a lack of transparency on behalf of whether it's council and staff. There's huge things that haven't even been uncovered and talked about, and I'm not going to get into it. And so my question simply is, why are we just understanding now that there's, or why we say now, I just recently became aware of the contract, of one of the sub-trades, when I thought there was an investigation going on since we first met in February 28th of 2020. 2.5+ years later. Oh, I only became aware of that recently. Someone answer that question.
Thank you. So I want to ask Scott, if you don't mind coming forward. Our Director of Development Services, so we are aware at this point that there was not a plumbing permit taken out. And I know referenced Councillor Paulson's comments. However, I know that Councillor Paulson's comments were in relation to the structural work. And we were assured that the imminent structural work was done. And I believe your comment that you were glad it was done as quick as it was once the issue was uncovered. That's what it was relating to, and nothing more than that. However, I just want to ask our Director of Development Services, would normal process be for a structural permit to be taken out with under the purview of an engineer, and then additional to that for a different permit to be taken out for plumbing work? And so, Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind sitting, I'm going to ask that question.
As long as I can respond back.
Sure.
So I'll do my best. So there was no original plumbing permit taken out, and therefore we don't have any documentation on who the contractor might have done plumbing work on the site. Last December of 2021, there were some imminent structural issues that were discovered by the property owner's architect and an engineer, and permits were taken out for that structural work, and additionally, not a permit taken out, but also confirmation on the fire alarm system being reactivated as part of that. So that work was done. Permits were taken out within that scope of work only. The property owner, to the best of my knowledge, has engaged an architect for potential future work that will require additional permits.
Okay.
So it's consistent what I'm saying, what I've just heard, that there's permits still to be taken out on work that hasn't been dealt with yet, but the work that has been done, that I've seen and I saw, I'm more concerned about whether that work was required to have a permit and whether it was inspected, or is it all covered up now after 2.5 years? And I'm not going to go by it. If anyone's listening to this, you can't sit there and say that I am not justified and continually coming up looking for these answers. It's all the dots are coming together now. And I think the council should have had more faith in some of the people that get up and keep bringing questions forward and having blind trust in all the information they're getting is accurate.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
This may be my last time on this issue for a while, but I want you to speak,
Thank you. And
on this issue and give proper facts and not go around in circles.
yeah, and I just want to note that I know this has been frustrating for you, and I'm sure you can imagine it has been frustrating for staff and council as well. Not because you're asking the questions, but because we're in a position to have to try to respond to questions that are not to do with business that we are intimately aware or familiar with, because it's not our building, it's not our business, so it's not something that typically would come to council, though I understand it has as a nature of the property owner. And I just want, hopefully, you to kind of appreciate as well that we have tried to make our best effort, and I understand that we have fallen short of being able to give you all of the information that you're looking for, but we have brought 2 staff reports from 2 different managers. Councillor Poon has read 2 statements. I've made a statement myself. Every member of council has spoken publicly to our disappointment in this issue. Myself and you and Roland Smith and 2 members of council and Scott Smith have had a 3-hour meeting, and I had a meeting with you following our last council meeting as well, and I understand that it still doesn't feel like enough, and I understand that you have more questions, but I say this because we are not trying to hide information from you. We are not trying to hide information from you.
You're not, but is there anyone else? You can't tell me that I've been told for 2.5+ years I haven't got answers to we'll stay to that one question. Who was the subcontractors? Were they qualified people? And that you've given me, you haven't given me anything until that last meeting. And I'm the one that provided information to the staff of who the plumbing contractor was, thanks to Councillor Poon. I don't know whether they did much work or what. That's just what I got from Councillor Poon, who told me that she told the building department. So you haven't been forthcoming with the information. Accountability and transparency has been a big issue here. And I was justified to this day. I don't feel any regret from coming back and driving people nuts asking these questions, because I knew there was something going on. And I knew that things were not, the transparency was not an issue, or was an issue. And that was Mr. Ply's comments twice at 2 different meetings. I think where we have failed is in transparency. Absolutely, I agree with that.
Thank you. And each member of council has acknowledged as well that we agree that we, needed to do better, and this has been a learning process for all of us. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to ask questions today? Okay, then would somebody like to move adjournment? Maybe you could mention community plan. Go ahead.
Just a reminder to the public, the community plan is going to be online, I believe, September 9th for responding, and people need to get out there if they want to plan our future, what our community would look like.
Thank you. And I would imagine that will be at letsconnectpa.ca. Thank you, Councillor Solda. Did somebody move adjournment? Moved by Councillor Poon, seconded by Councillor Haggard. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.